My name is Mari Thorne, and I came to the edge of the Namibian desert to disappear. Not to find peace. Not to heal. Not to start over. Just to vanish. I told people I was taking a sabbatical from my life. A break from the buzzing emails. The shallow condolences, the city that smelled like concrete and broken promises. But the truth, I had nothing left and no career I cared about. No family who truly saw me. No reason to stay. I didn't come here looking for lions. But he was waiting. For me anyway. The plane landed on a dry strip of sand and wind. The reserve was 2 hours from the nearest paved road, buried in the folds of sunburnt hills and thorny acacia trees. No cell reception. No lights after dark. Just heat, dust, and silence, exactly what I thought I wanted. I'd found the sanctuary. By accident, one of those late-night searches when you're scrolling through places you'll never visit, clicking deeper and deeper until the world starts to feel very far away. The volunteer coordinator, a woman named Linda, had responded to my half-hearted application within hours. She said they had space. Said they needed hands. Said it wasn't glamorous. I said I didn't care. The other volunteers arrived laughing, dragging backpacks, high on novelty and hope. I kept my distance. I wasn't here to bond. I wasn't here for the experience. I was here to not feel anything. They gave me a small room with cracked walls, a cot, and a fan that sounded like it was dying. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, as if the more time I spent folding clothes I didn't care about, the less I had to think about him, the one I lost, the one I wasn't supposed to talk about. Damn, why first few days passed in a blur of routine, preparing feed, cleaning enclosures, filling water troughs under a sun that burned through everything. There were cheetahs, leopards, meerkats. Most were rescue animals, orphans or injuries or victims of human stupidity. I didn't ask for names, didn't look them in the eye, until it was late afternoon when I saw the lion, not just a lion, the lion. I was walking behind the main compound, headed toward the storage shed, when I felt it, that invisible hum on the back of your neck, like someone is watching you. I turned slowly, the sun blinding me for a second, and then I saw him standing behind the inner perimeter fence, motionless, golden. Immense. Still as a statue. His eyes met mine, and the world tilted. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move, and for one suspended moment, the heat disappeared. The noise. The weight. All of it gone, swallowed by those eyes. Amber. Endless. Ancient. They told me later his name was Aslan. A name that felt too gentle for something so magnificent. So terrifyingly real. He had been rescued as a cub, left behind after poachers killed his mother. He had a shattered front paw that never healed quite right, which meant he could never be released into the wild. He wasn't aggressive, but he wasn't tame either. He had a space all to himself, a large open enclosure, half bush, half rock, bordered by thick fencing. Visitors weren't allowed near it. He doesn't like people, one of the rangers said, but that wasn't true because the next day, when I passed that same path, he was there again, watching, waiting, and again. I couldn't walk away. I started taking longer routes between chores. Routes that, coincidentally, passed by his enclosure. I never approached the fence. Never called to him. I wasn't that naive. But I looked. And he looked back. Sometimes he stood, sometimes he sat like a king on a throne of stone, unmoving. Sometimes I found him dozing, but one ear always twitched when I stepped too close. That he was aware. Always, and so was I. There was a gravity to him. Not just because of his size, though he was the largest creature I had ever seen up close, shoulders like boulders, mane thick and wind-tangled, paws that could crush bone. No, it was something else, something unspoken. A stillness that felt like judgment, but not the cruel kind. The kind that sees everything you are and simply knows. I hated how much I needed that, how much I needed to be seen. One evening, I lingered longer than I meant to. The sun was a bleeding orange on the horizon, and the other volunteers had already headed back for dinner, but I stayed. I sat on a dry patch of earth 10 feet from the fence and just watched. He lay on a flat stone, tail flicking slowly, eyes half-lidded. You don't care, do you? I muttered. About any of it. He blinked slowly. About pain. Or loss. Or people. No response. Just breathing slow. Steady. Present. I used to be someone, I whispered, and the second the words left my mouth, I felt stupid, but I didn't stop. My name is Mara. I used to design exhibitions. Traveled a lot. Had a fiancé. The breeze shifted. Carried the scent of dry grass and dusk. He died in a car accident 3 months before the wedding. Everyone told me to take time. To heal. To breathe. So I left. His eyes opened wider. Focused, I felt my throat tighten. Doesn't matter, though. Nothing changes. No one actually listens. Not really. Silence, and then, as if summoned by something ancient, he stood, not aggressively, just rose to his full, impossible height, and slowly walked toward me. I didn't move, I didn't even breathe. The fence stood between us. Thick and secure, but it felt like nothing, like I could step through it with one thought. He stopped just feet from me. We were eye level now. Me sitting on dry grass. Him towering. He stared, I stared back, and in that moment, for the first time in what felt like years, I felt real, not broken, not ruined, just here. He huffed once, low and steady, then turned and walked away, mane shifting like wildfire in the wind. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, heart still pounding, not with fear, but with something dangerously close to hope, because one look from the lion, and I couldn't walk away. Not now, not ever. They say lions don't form attachments, not to humans. Not really, but Aslan wasn't like the others, and I was beginning to realize I wasn't either. The days began to fall into a rhythm. The kind of rhythm you don't notice until something breaks it. Feed the meerkats. Check the fencing. Scrub. Water troughs. Avoid unnecessary conversation. But always, always, pass by Aslan's enclosure, not at the same time. Not always for the same reason. But somehow, we kept finding each other. He'd be there, lounging in the dust like royalty. One paw over the other, his mane heavy with sun and wind. Waiting. I never called to him. I never needed to. All I had to do was show up, and he would look at me like he remembered. Like he expected me. Linda, I noticed first, you've taken a liking to the big one, she said one evening, her accent lilting over the crackling fire as we all sat outside after dinner. I didn't respond right away. She looked at me, brown eyes sharp. He doesn't watch people like that, you know. I'm not sure he's watching, I muttered, poking at the edge of my plate. Oh, he is, she said. Aslan sees everything. The next afternoon, I sat on a flat stone outside his fence, pretending to read a book I couldn't focus on. I didn't have to glance up to know he was near. His presence had a weight to it, an invisible gravity that pressed gently against the air. I finally looked. He was sitting just on the other side of the fence, closer than usual. His breath moved his mane. His golden eyes locked on mine, and neither of us moved. I felt my pulse flicker. Not in fear, but something older. Deeper. Are you trying to figure me out? I whispered. A breeze rolled between us. He didn't blink. I don't know who I am anymore. I thought I did. But after James died, my voice cracked. I hadn't said his name in weeks. Months, maybe, but Aslan didn't flinch. Didn't turn away, just breathed, still. Steady. I used to believe in connection. In energy. In people. In art. I built exhibitions in cities around the world, immersive displays, soundscapes, stories told through light and space. I used to think, if you made something beautiful enough, it could hold people together. Keep them feeling. Then came the phone call, the crash, the silence. James had been driving to see a venue for our wedding. It was raining. A curve. A truck in the wrong lane. Just like that, he was gone, and the world stopped making sense. Now, here I was, on the other side of the planet, sitting across from a lion who somehow made me feel more seen than any living person had in over a year. He never growled, never paced, just watched, and that was enough. One morning, I approached his enclosure earlier than usual. The air was still cool, the sky streaked with lavender and rust. He wasn't lying down this time. He was waiting, standing at the edge of the fence, head held high, tail flicking slowly like a pendulum. I stopped short. Okay, I whispered. What now? He stepped closer to so did I. Until there was only the fence between us, less than a meter. I crouched down, heart pounding, and placed my hand on the metal. He didn't move but didn't back away, and then, without a sound, he pressed his nose to the same spot. We stayed like that. Breath to breath. Flesh to iron, and something cracked in me, not violently, just enough for the light to begin leaking in. Later, I told myself it was a coincidence. That he didn't mean anything by it. That I was projecting my grief, my needs, my longing onto a wild animal, but the next day, it happened again, and the next, until touching the fence between us became sacred. The other volunteers began to talk. I heard snippets behind my back as she just sits there all day. Is that even allowed? It's not safe, is it? I didn't care that I wasn't there for them, I was there for him. Or maybe, for me. One evening, as the sun poured molten light across the savannah, I sat cross-legged just outside his fence. The lion lay near, his side rising and falling in slow, patient waves. I used to dream about the future, I murmured. His ear twitched. Now I dream about fire. About falling. About nothing. My fingers traced patterns in the sand. I thought if I left, the pain wouldn't follow me. But it did. It always does. I looked up. He was watching, still. Unblinking eye. Think you know what that's like? A long silence passed between us, then he let out the softest sound, a rumble, deep in his chest, not a roar. Not a warning, something lower, older, like recognition. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing his eyes in the dark behind my eyelids, not haunting me, just there, always there, like he was no longer part of this place, but part of me. The following day brought the wind, hot, dry, restless. It stirred everything, leaves, dust. Memories. The rangers warned us to stay inside during the strongest gusts, but I couldn't help myself. I made my way to the edge of Oslin's enclosure, hair whipping across my face, and he was there. Of course he was. This time, he wasn't lying down. He was pacing, slow, deliberate, and then, as I approached, he stopped and turned. One look, that was all. One look from the lion, and I stepped closer. Why do you stay here? I asked. You could retreat to the shade. Ignore us. He blinked, then lowered his head slightly. Why do I keep coming back? I answered myself. The wind howled between us. The fence rattled. My skin burned from dust and sun. I whispered, I don't want to be afraid anymore. He walked toward me. I didn't move, and again, only that wire mesh separated us. He leaned and pressed his forehead to the fence, and I did the same. It was the closest I'd come to peace in years, not joy. Not happiness, but stillness. A space where everything else fell away, and only the truth remained. That night, as I lay in my cot, I clutched the edge of my blanket and whispered his name into the darkness, Aslan. Like a prayer. Like an anchor, because the truth was simple. He was closer than I thought, and I couldn't walk away, not now, not ever. The wind didn't stop the next day. It got worse, hotter. Heavier. Unnatural. By noon, the sky over the reserve had turned a strange, silvery brown, the sun hidden behind a veil of dust and tension. The air was thick, charged, like something was about to break, and then it did. The radio crackled in the main hut. One of the rangers, Johann, answered, face paling as the voice on the other end spoke rapidly in Afrikaans. He hung up and turned to the group of volunteers gathered inside. There's a storm system moving in from the northwest. Could hit hard. Too hard. Lindau stood immediately. We need to start evacuation protocols. Move the animals from the outer pens, reinforce the fences. Visitors and non-essential staff will be taken to the base camp in the lowlands. Johann added. Safer there. Signal 2. The other volunteers started murmuring. Packing. Asking questions. I just stood still. A thorn? Lindau's voice broke through the haze. You'll be on the second truck. I shook my head. No, her brows drew together. This isn't optional. But I couldn't leave him. 30 minutes later, the evacuation began. They didn't fight me. Not really. I think Lindau knew something had changed, something they couldn't touch or measure. You'll stay in the old generator shed, she said, handing me a flashlight and 3 bottles of water. Concrete walls. Low profile. You'll be safe there, as long as you stay inside. She paused. And don't go near the enclosures. If the fences fail, they won't, I said, but what I meant was, he won't up by sunset. The reserve was empty, except for me, and the lion I waited in the shed for an hour, curled in a sleeping bag with the wind howling outside, rattling the metal roof like bones in a drum. The flashlight flickered on and off, casting long shadows on the walls. I tried to sleep, tried to breathe, but my mind kept returning to the same image, his eyes open. Watching. Waiting. I stood up. Outside, the air was thick with dust, the horizon swallowed in red and gold. Trees bent in the wind like dancers losing their balance. The fences groaned, and through it all, far across the clearing, I saw him standing, still unmoved. Aslan, the lion. I ran, not fast, not foolish, but with the steady urgency of someone drawn by something she didn't fully understand. The wind pushed against me, but I didn't stop till I reached the edge of his enclosure just as another gust slammed into the trees. Branches snapped. Somewhere, a piece of tin roofing clanged loose, but Aslan didn't flinch that he was facing the wind. Facing me, I dropped to my knees outside the fence, panting, coughing on dust, hair sticking to my face. You stayed, I said to him, my voice cracked in the wind, barely audible. You stayed. He took 2 steps closer, and I broke, not loudly. Not violently, but something in me gave way, like a wall, long-worn and cracked, finally crumbling under the weight it was never meant to carry. I sobbed. I didn't get to say goodbye. The wind howled, answering for him. I didn't know how to keep breathing without him. I still don't. He stopped at the edge of the fence. Close. So close, and everyone kept telling me to move on. To let go. To smile again. My voice dropped to a whisper, but you didn't ask me to be okay. You just waited. He lay down slowly, dust swirling around him, and rested his chin on his paws, calm. Still. Steady. I leaned my forehead against the fence. I thought I came here to disappear. I looked at him, but you saw me anyway. Hours passed. I don't know how long I sat there, whispering fragments of memories into the storm. My breath turned hoarse. My body shook, and still, he stayed. An "oh" growled, an "oh" sound, just presence. Eventually, the storm broke, not with thunder or rain, but with silence, sudden, profound. I blinked, realizing the wind had died. The air was thick. But still, even the trees seemed surprised. I stood on shaky legs. Aslan remained where he was, and then, something shifted. A sound behind me. I turned. One of the maintenance gates had been thrown open by the wind. Bent backward. Hanging wide, the emergency enclosure, used for storm relocation, sat just beyond it, and in it, no fencing. I turned back to Aslan. He stood, and for a terrifying, beautiful second, I thought he might come through, but he didn't. He stepped forward, just once, then stopped. He looked at me, not with hunger, not with threat, but with something deeper, and then he lay down again, not behind the fence, not away from me, but right there, where I was. I dropped to my knees again. I didn't reach out, didn't speak, just Saturday, and cried, not out of grief, not out of fear, but out of knowing, because in that moment, I understood something simple and shattering. He had been waiting, not to be released, not to escape, but to be with me. That night, I slept in the open for the first time, on the ground, next to the lion. The storm far behind us, and when I woke at dawn, wrapped in the hush of a world reborn, he was still there, watching and waiting. For the first time in a year, I felt whole, not healed. Not fixed, but whole, because he had waited for me, and I hadn't walked away. When I opened my eyes, the earth was glowing. It wasn't the sky, still dim and bruised from the night, but the soil itself, soaked in soft orange light, warm as breath. The kind of light that comes after something has broken. I sat up slowly, stiff and sore, the blanket wrapped tightly around my shoulders. A thin veil of morning mist curled across the ground, catching the rising sun like gold dust, and there he was, Aslan, sleeping just a few feet away, his massive frame still and steady, the end of his tail twitching gently in some unknowable dream. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. This wasn't a zoo, this wasn't safe. There was no fence between us anymore, just open space, and trust. I stayed frozen, half upright, every muscle alert. I didn't know if I should move or stay still, call for help or stay quiet. Every wildlife rule, every training manual, every never approach a predator lesson screamed in my mind, but none of them had prepared me for this, for a lion that had watched me through grief. For a lion that had waited for me in the storm. For a lion that had chosen not to leave. He stirred, not suddenly. Not sharply, just shifted. A slow rise of the head. Eyes half-lidded, blinking into the mist, and then he saw me, not as a threat, not as prey, just as me. His eyes widened slightly. Ears lifted. The slow, familiar movement of recognition. I didn't speak. Didn't move, but I think he felt it, that crackling tension in the space between us. The unspoken something pressing against the air, and he didn't run. Didn't roar. He stood, walked forward. 1 step. Then another, each footfall silent on the soft sand. My breath caught in my throat. He was so close now I could hear the quiet rumble of his lungs. See the flecks of dust in his mane. His presence swallowed everything, time, space. Fear. It was just him. Just me, and then he stopped right in front of me. We stood still, the rising sun framed his silhouette, golden light dancing across his mane like a crown made of fire, and still, he did not move, not closer, not away, just waited. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the stillness, maybe it was the ache in my chest finally giving way to something braver. Or maybe I just needed to know. Slowly, breath by breath, I reached out my hand. My fingers trembled. I paused. He blinked, slow, calm at an invitation. I stepped forward, and touched him. My hand met the side of his face, just behind the jaw. His fur was coarser than I'd imagined, thick and warm, dense like brush. He didn't move. Didn't even flinch. He just allowed it. A single moment, frozen in a kind of ancient silence, where nothing else mattered. The world didn't spin, the pain didn't scream. There was only this, the softness of a mane beneath my palm, and the overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone in the universe. Not anymore. Tears came without warning, not the bitter kind I'd cried at funerals, or the tired kind I'd cried into pillows. These were different. They came like rain falling on dry earth, unexpected, cleansing. He turned his head slightly, nuzzling into my hand, not pushing me away, but drawing me closer. I dropped to my knees, buried my face into the side of his neck, and sobbed. I told him everything, things I hadn't told anyone. Not even myself, about the guilt. The days I hadn't gotten out of bed. The people I pushed away. The way James's mother looked at me like I was the one driving, about how I'd walked through airports, cities, oceans, looking for something to make it okay. And found nothing until now, until him, and Aslan. He didn't speak, of course, but he listened, with every quiet breath. Every shift of weight. Every still second where he didn't leave that silence. It was louder than any words I'd ever heard. Eventually, I pulled back. My hands still rested on his fur. I looked up into his eyes, and something in me changed, something irreversible. But then, a sound of voices, far off, but approaching, rushed footsteps. Shouting, I stood quickly, blinking toward the noise, the staff. They'd returned. I turned back to Aslan. He was already stepping away, slow and regal, not fleeing, not afraid, just done. He padded off toward the edge of the trees, his body fading into the tall grass like he had never been there at all. The first person to reach me was Linda. She skidded to a halt, saw where I stood, looked at the open enclosure, the empty gate, the paw prints in the dust, and froze. Mara. She breathed, voice cracking. I nodded. I'm okay, I said softly. She stared at me for a long time, my tear-streaked face, my dust-covered hands, then whispered, "What happened?" And I gave the only answer I could. I touched him. There was chaos for the rest of the day. Emergency protocols, system checks, panic in every corner of the reserve. But Aslan returned to his main enclosure before noon, on his own. Calm. Unbothered as if nothing had happened, but something had. They didn't punish me. Not really, Linda spoke with quiet gravity. You broke every safety rule we have. You should have stayed inside. I know. And if it had gone differently, I nodded. I know. But she didn't scold me, because she had seen it too. I in the way I stood, I in the way Aslan had walked away, not wild, not caged, but something in between. I spent that night in my room, lying on the cot with my eyes wide open, and in the quiet dark, I whispered a truth I had been afraid to speak since the moment James's name stopped appearing on my phone. I want to live. Not survive. Not escape, live, and somehow, a lion had reminded me how I knew it was coming. They didn't say it outright, not at first. But you can hear it in the pauses. In the clipped emails. The radio calls just a little too polite. The way Lindau started avoiding my gaze when she walked past. They were going to move him. It's not punishment, Johan explained, arms crossed, voice neutral. We've received clearance for Aslan to be transferred to a new sanctuary. Larger habitat. More open space. Better long-term care. I nodded slowly. But he's not just any lion. He's not, Johan agreed. Which is exactly why he needs the space. He's different. Different. That word again, too wild to be tame. Too aware to be wild, just like me. The news left a hollow ache. In my chest, I told myself I should be happy for him. He'd have more room to roam, more sun to stretch in, less confinement, but my heart grieved. I wasn't ready, I wasn't done, and I wasn't sure how to say goodbye to something that had never really belonged to me. I spent the next 2 days in quiet motion, feeding the animals, avoiding the other volunteers, walking long loops around the reserve until my legs ached, but every evening, I ended up where I always did, outside Aslan's enclosure. He was quieter now. As if he knew, sometimes he wouldn't come to the fence, sometimes he would just sit, watching the wind through the grass, body still, mane rippling like a flame on slow burn. He didn't need to speak, I already knew, the night before the transfer. I couldn't sleep. The moon hung low and orange over the desert hills, and the air had that strange, anticipatory silence that comes before something ends. I rose quietly, pulled on my boots, and stepped outside. The compound was asleep, not a single flashlight beam. Not a whisper of movement, just the hum of insects, the distant howl of jackals, and my heartbeat echoing like footsteps in a hallway. I wasn't ready to leave. I walked to his gate, unlocked it, and opened it, not recklessly. Not carelessly, just honestly. I stood back and waited, the open path stretching before us under moonlight. If he left, I would let him. If he ran, I wouldn't stop him. If this was our last moment, I wanted it to be his choice. For a while, nothing happened. He remained where he was, half-shadowed beneath the acacia tree at the far end of the enclosure. His head was raised. His eyes on me. Yet he had seen everything that he always did. I stepped aside. I won't follow, I whispered. But I won't forget. The breeze shifted. He rose, moved forward, not fast, not fearful, just steady. My chest tightened with each step he took. This was it. He was leaving. He stopped right at the gate. He looked out at the open land beyond, then back at me, and he did something I never expected. He sat down. He didn't leave. He didn't run. He stayed, with the gate wide open, the path clear, the world waiting. He chose to stay with me. Wide legs gave out. I sank to the ground, trembling. Tears stung my eyes, not from sadness, but from awe, because this wasn't just loyalty. It was something deeper. A wordless answer to a question I hadn't dared ask. I had opened the gate not to free him, but to free myself, and he had shown me I was no longer the one who needed to run. I don't know how long we stayed like that, minutes. Maybe hours. Eventually, I stood and walked to him, sat beside his enormous frame, laid my hand against his side, felt his breath, and I said, goodbye. Not aloud, not with words, but with silence and gratitude and love that didn't need a future to be real. They came for him. At dawn, a quiet crew, experienced and respectful. Though I wasn't allowed to go with him, that was part of the terms, but before they loaded him into the crate, Linda paused beside me, her eyes soft. Do you want one more minute? I nodded. They opened the door for me. Aslan was already inside, calm, alert. I stepped close and knelt. He looked at me, eyes endless and golden, as familiar now as my own hands. I pressed my forehead to the edge of the crate. You saved me, I whispered. His breath warmed my face. And I'll carry you forever. He blinked once, and I stood. They closed the door, and he was gone. The weeks that followed were quiet, still, but not empty. I stayed at the reserve a while longer. Finished my term. Made friends. Laughed again. Sometimes I cried at night, but it didn't break me, and not anymore, because I knew what it meant to touch something wild, and be touched in return. Eventually, I went home. The city, the noise, but I wasn't the same. I wasn't running anymore, because every time the world got too loud, too sharp, I remembered his eyes, the moment he stayed, and the gate I left open. The end.